Coming up on this episode, the Warriors conclude their three-game homestand in negative fashion with one of their worst losses of the season against the San Antonio Spurs on Saturday night. Yes, welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. What a difference. What a difference 3 days can make. Honestly, I was sitting here 72 hours ago and I could not speak more positively after the Warriors blew out the Milwaukee Bucks 125-90 on, Wednesday night, US time. And for me, since then, it's been nothing short of a nightmare for Golden State. And my weekend, it's Sunday afternoon here, just gone 4:30 p.m. My weekend has consisted of watching the Warriors lose to the Chicago Bulls on Friday for me, with Steph Curry getting injured and going down with that ankle issue. With less than 4 minutes remaining in the fourth quarter, they're going to lose that game, which just compounds the bigger issue, which is the Steph injury, of course. And then yesterday, Saturday, the start of the AFL season for my club, Collingwood, obviously beginning the hunt for back-to-back premierships, and we lose pretty comprehensively to the GWS Giants, so that was not a great watch either. Hoping that there might be some more positivity here on Sunday, with the Warriors heavy favourites to beat a Victor Wembanyama-less San Antonio Spurs at Chase Center, and they go on to lose 126-113. So a disastrous few days for me, sporting-wise, and a disastrous couple of days for the Warriors, given back-to-back losses. You know, I spoke about a couple of episodes ago about this homestand, the 3 games, and if the Warriors were serious about getting into at least the top 8 in the Western Conference, if not trying to get a guaranteed playoff berth by getting into 6th, then they really had to go 3-0 on this homestand, and they end at 1-2. They end the week 1-3 if you include that disastrous, embarrassing Celtics loss at the start of the week as well. So it's been an absolute horrific few days for the Warriors, and the only positive, I suppose, from it is the fact that Steph's ankle issue doesn't seem to be as bad as first feared. Obviously, he's got a history of ankle injuries. When he went down, limped off the floor against the Bulls, there were genuine concerns that he would be out for a significant amount of time. The Warriors announced today that Steph would be reevaluated on Tuesday, meaning that he'll miss the next game against the Spurs on Monday in San Antonio, but then be reevaluated for a couple of pivotal matchups against the Dallas Mavericks and Los Angeles Lakers, which could be season-defining for the Warriors. But they have put even more pressure on themselves with this loss today. And, I don't want to speak about it too much because I just hate talking negatively, but I think they put themselves at a disadvantage before this game even begun, if I'm being totally honest. And obviously you lose your best player, the best player in franchise history, one of the top 10 players of all time. You are clearly going to be impacted, and you've really got to try and find a way to negate the loss of Steph Curry as much as you can. And I don't think Steve put the Warriors in a good enough position to be able to do that. And I'm talking about the starting lineup. So obviously Chris Paul is going to replace Steph in the starting lineup. Obviously no issues with that. That was always going to happen. There's always going to be more responsibility, more pressure on CP3. I actually looked at this from a little bit of a glass half full standpoint, thinking, well, when they traded for Chris Paul during the offseason, there was a little bit of an overlap, a little bit of a redundancy, obviously, in what Chris Paul does, given you've already got Steph Curry in place. And what kind of role would Chris Paul play as a backup point guard, which he's never done in his career? And to CP3's credit, I think he's taken on that responsibility really well. But when that trade happened, it was clearly going to give you the luxury of, hey, when Steph misses time, which is inevitable, like he hasn't played more than 70 games since the 16-17 season, I think. So when Steph misses time, you are going to have a future Hall of Fame point guard to be able to carry those duties. And so I was taking the half glass full approach that CP3 would be able to come in. Yes, the Warriors might play a little bit differently, but they'd still be able to be somewhat near effective, or at least effective enough to beat a Spurs team who is the worst team, who have been the worst team in the conference this season, entering with a 13-50 record, without their best player and firm favourite for Rookie of the Year in Victor Wembanyama, one of the best defensive players in the league already. So there's full expectations that Golden State would win this game obviously. So CP3 clearly going to start with Steph out. And then the notable one, I suppose, was Trace Jackson-Davis coming into the starting lineup for Andrew Wiggins. So I get that in a sense, because with CP3, you are going to play differently and you want to provide him a lob threat, which TJD clearly does. You want a guy who can run the floor and that he can find. I get all that. But clearly it gives a distinct lack of shooting in the starting lineup. There's actually, and I've spoken about it before this season, that there's actually a distinct lack of shooting on this Warrior roster outside Steph and Klay. So when you are missing Steph, that only heightens the importance of Klay Thompson, not just with his shooting, but the gravity that provides. And if you are going to take Wiggins out and put TJD in, then you had to, and I mean you had to. And this is not me saying this in hindsight. You can go back and see my tweets from before the starting lineup was confirmed. I tweeted out earlier this morning, with CP3 starting, they should start Klay. Klay needed to start over Pods. He did. And that's nothing against Pods. That's just the way this team sets up without Steph Curry, is that you need Klay Thompson shooting. You need Klay Thompson's gravity to be able to pull the defense out. Because what point is a Chris Paul TJD pick and roll and TJD being the lob threat and JK being a rim presence if the defense is just going to sag into you and not actually respect those on the outside? And so that was a move that just had to be made. And unfortunately, it kind of waited till the second half. And then even in the second half, they started CP, Pods, Klay, Draymond, and Kuminga, sorry. Yeah, so they had Klay in for TJD, which, again, I don't think is necessarily the right call. I don't mind having TJD there as a lob threat, but you've also got to have the shooting threat of Klay to be able to compensate for that and for the lack of shooting that was in the starting lineup. And I think that was a huge issue, obviously, for the Warriors. If you look at this game, I think they got outscored by 21 at the three-point line. Spurs made 17 of their 33 three-point attempts. The Warriors went 10 of 30. You're just not going to win games when you lose the three-point battle like that, when you are predominantly still a three-point shooting team. Now, yes, that's less so with Steph out, but you've still got to find a way to at least even that battle up. And then, obviously, at the end of the day, the Warriors lose by 13. So this is the second straight game where the Warriors have lost the three-point battle against teams that aren't great three-point shooting teams. They lost to the Bulls the other day as well, 125, 122 defeat there on the back of some really hot shooting from Chicago and the Warriors struggling from beyond the arc. So I think Steve just put the team at a disadvantage by the starting lineup he put out there. Now, should the Warriors have still won the game? Absolutely. But you saw in that first half, they were able to get nothing going offensively, really stagnant, shot 5 of 18 from 3. 3 of those makes were from Klay coming off the bench. And so the offense, for sure, picked up in the second half. They put up 70 in the second half. The offense was fine, but it was too late by that point because you're already trying to overcome a 19-point deficit, which against any team in the NBA, I know we've spoken about it relentlessly with the fact that the Warriors have given up so many 15-plus point leads. But I don't care about the pace of the NBA and the three-point shooting and the ease of which it is, the ease of which you're able to come back from huge deficits compared to the past. I don't care. If you're down 19 at halftime against any NBA team, you are very, very unlikely to win that game. And so as good as the Warriors' offense was in the second half, Klay continued to have a good game. Bit bizarre that he played less than 25 minutes. Maybe Steve saw the writing on the wall in the fourth quarter there, just continued to ride the young guys out for the remainder of the fourth. Really didn't bring Klay back, didn't bring Draymond back for minutes down the stretch there. So maybe that was a factor, but Klay had 27 in less than 25 minutes, 8 of 16 shooting, 5 of 10 from three-point range. He played fairly well, and he should have started. It just that's a plain fact. He should have started. I'm going to be interested to see what they do come Monday against the Spurs, and I think it's even more important on Monday or Tuesday my time if Wemby it sounds like he's probably going to play that game. So if he does play, then I think it becomes even more important that Klay is out there because your ability to get to the rim and provide that interior presence is going to be much less so with Victor Wembanyama, one of the best shot blockers, one of the best defensive players out there. So it's going to be, I think, I'll be gobsmacked. I'd be surprised if Klay doesn't start on Monday against the Spurs. And then we'll see what happens moving forward in terms of Steph's injury. But while Steph is out, I don't really care what else happens. While Steph is out, I think Clay should be starting, and I think that's a move that Steve needs to make. Back onto the lack of three-point shooting for the Warriors, because there has been a bit of an issue at times this season, even though I think they're still third in three-point attempts. And I think they're still top 8 in three-point percentage. So it's not a huge issue. But when one of Steph or Clay miss, it kind of does become a real issue. And there's not really, you can't just summon someone from the end of the bench to say, hey, we need some three-point shooting, come make some shots now. Lester Quinones a little bit, but he's just really, he's not that guy. He's not a spot-up guy that you're going to run plays for. So that's an issue for the Warriors. And I think, Moses has been fantastic since he returned to the rotation, 7 games ago now. Started off hot. I think he was 4 of 7 in that first game that he had in Wiggs' absence. But since then, he's 4 of 23 from beyond the arc. And he's probably the guy that you look at as, okay, here's your genuine 3-and-D wing that could go out there and potentially shoot 40% from three-point range. I remember when Moses had a really good preseason, and him and JK were really up and firing early before the season started. And I kind of made the comment, can Moses shoot 40% from three-point range? I thought that was a realistic goal, but his three-point shooting hasn't quite been there this season. I get that sometimes from when you're in and out of the rotation like he has been, but obviously across these last 6 games, he's had a solidified rotation spot playing 20-plus minutes, and he just hasn't been able to find that 3 ball, which is a little bit frustrating in a stretch where the Warriors could really do with it. And again, the fact that he's been able to be a positive influence despite that is a credit to him, but that doesn't mean that the Warriors don't need his three-point shooting, and he goes 0 of 6 again today. So a bit disappointing there, because I think he's the one. JK is never going to be a great three-point shooter. Draymond's hitting at a career rate, but no one's still really guarding him. CP3's shooting the ball okay, but again, he's never going to be an elite three-point shooter. GP2 was out today. We know he's not going to be an elite three-point shooter. Pods is still young, still developing that part of his game. So there's really just not, Wiggs has been up and down. He's probably the other one where you look at and think, can we get some three-point makes out of him? But if the Warriors are going to continue to be beaten beyond the three-point line, then they're going to struggle to win games given their inability usually to get to the free throw line. Now, they got to the free throw line a heap today, but at the same time, they also conceded 28 free throws. And Steve said after the game, when you concede 28 free throws, when you give up 17 of 33 from beyond the arc, you're not going to win games. You're just not going to win games, especially when you're missing Steph and Curry. So, disappointing performance from the Warriors overall. Couple of notable aspects. Loon had his games record of 255. I think it was 255 consecutive games played. Broken the other night against the Bulls. Didn't play again tonight either against the Spurs. So I like the fact they're leaning into TJD a little bit more. We saw what he did against Giannis and the Bucks the other day. A little bit quieter over these last 2 outings, but still, 11.6 rebounds today is okay. And I think it's crucial to continue to give him reps. As Steve said after the Milwaukee game, he needs to play more to get into a position where he's playoff ready. The problems are that the Warriors aren't necessarily looking to be at that point based on these last 2 losses, which is really, really going to come back to bite them, I think. You look back at the season and the bad losses they've had, losing to the San Antonio Spurs without Victor Wembanyama at home at Chase Center, that's one you're going to look back at and really regret, I would think. And now they put themselves under huge pressure to win on Monday against the Spurs, and then they've got 2 huge matchups against the Mavericks and Lakers. There'll be the first of 3 meetings against the Mavericks, who have now been able to create a little bit of a space between themselves after the Warriors are within half a game. They're back to, 2.5 games, maybe, if not more, in the standings. So Warriors back to 10th, and they are 2.5 games back from the Mavericks. A full game now back from the Lakers. Lakers 35-30, Warriors 33-30. They're 3.5 games back from the Suns in 7th, and the Kings also 3.5 games in 6th. So, yeah, I don't know. We were talking, that you beat the Bucks the other day by 35, looked fantastic. fully healthy rotation for the first time in 4 months since the start of November. And you really think to yourself, yeah, like this is a team that could push up to hopefully 7th, I think, to be able to get, a home playing game, and if not, maybe potentially get to 6th. And then you have 2 really poor performances like this. And I don't think Steph getting injured is an excuse. I think you still could have beaten the Bulls the other day. This is the Warriors' issues have come on the defensive end of the floor, and that's not where Steph does his business. He does his business on the offensive end. Now, yes, I think the offense hurt them big time in the first half, but you still should be keeping San Antonio to much less than 126 points. You should still be keeping the Chicago Bulls to much less than 125 points the other day. And so this was a defense that, the Warriors really kind of hung their hat on over a 14-4 stretch over 18 games. Their defense was really elite. And now it's just gone missing for a couple of games. And that, again, when the race to the playoffs is so tight, you look back at these and you think that's where we lost it. And there's so many times throughout the season the Warriors will look back at once the season's over if they ultimately don't get where they want. But just a short podcast for me today. The biggest thing is, as I said before, the Warriors put themselves at a disadvantage by not starting Klay Thompson. And I think even if the TJD thing hadn't happened and you were just starting CP, Pods, Wiggs, JK and Draymond, I still think that's probably a lack of shooting given how up and down some of the Wiggs and Pods have been this season with their 3-point shooting. The fact is, when Stephen Curry is out, Klay Thompson should be starting. And whatever you need to do to make that happen, it is what it is. Now, Chris Paul is certainly going to start without Steph. We get that. Whether it's Klay in for Pods, what they did at the start of the second half was better, at least, and it showed. They put up 70 in the second half. JK took a while to get going, so he finished with 26 on 10 of 17 shooting, but did predominantly much of his work in the fourth quarter, where he started to dominate really offensively, but again, the Warriors couldn't get stops on the other end. It just meant that the deficit was too much to overcome. They won the second half by 6 points. They managed to get it down to 9 in the third quarter, but they just could not stop the Spurs, who were firing at a season-best rate. I think that was the first time all season they'd shot above 50% from three-point range. So some of this is luck, right? Some of this is just hot shooting from the opposition team. But I think that's a bit of a bailout to say, they were just hot from three-point range. I think you've got to look at what you were doing defensively. Some of the lack of intent in terms of transition defense and getting back was really poor from the Warriors. There's no doubt about that. And it's something I'm sure Steve will allude to, and something that's got to be better if you want to be a playoff team. Like, you can't have results like you did today and expect to be a playoff team. You don't deserve that. You do not deserve that. And it's really unfortunate because they had a great stretch where they were 14-4 in 18 games, one of the best teams in the league. But you have got to sustain that. The Warriors put themselves so far behind the 8 ball that you've got to sustain that. And you can't afford to have these. You could afford to have one outlier against the Celtics. I get it. That's fine. I gave a pass for that one. I gave a pass for that one so long as they came out and essentially had a 3-0 homestand. Started fantastically well against the Bucks. And that should have been the game that gave you the most danger. And you win that game by 35, and yet you go out and lose to the Bulls and Spurs. You don't deserve to make the playoffs. You don't deserve to make the playoffs if you're going to do that, given the situation you're in. So it's unfortunate, but it is what it is, and let's hope they can bounce back against the Spurs. And then they've got the games against the Mavericks and Lakers, which are going to be absolutely pivotal. And we'll see what happens with Steph. I'd be surprised if he was back for that Mavericks game. The injury just looked much worse than only being out for 2 games. You also don't want to force him too much, because at this rate, there's a genuine chance that even if you push things as hard as you can and Steph comes back, you still might miss the playoffs. You still might be eliminated in the first round. And I think with what some of the young guys are doing, and I think this is what Steve is also doing here, is that, yes, we're trying to see what we can get out of this season, but there's a weird context to this season, which has kind of, yes, been a disappointing season, but it might have opened up your window for the next couple of seasons based on what JK and based on how impactful Pods has been, and TJD as well, and now Moses over the last few games. So there's a weird context there where now your window might be a little bit more open over the next couple of seasons than what you once realised, and therefore you don't necessarily want to force Steph back quicker than what you probably should just to try and salvage something out of this season when that could potentially impact him long-term next season and beyond. So it's kind of a weird place that the Warriors are at, where you're trying to salvage something out of your season. You still think that if you make the playoffs, you can be a threat of some kind. And I think they should believe that. That's fine. But they also they also owe something to next season's roster, of which will be the majority of what we're seeing now. Like the majority of players really outside Clay are under contract. Chris Paul is obviously another big one. But, the young guys and Steph and Draymond, Steve now as coach, are all locked in for next season. And so there has to be, if it's not an eye, it has to be a little look at next season going forward for the remainder of this season, of which the Warriors have got, 19 games to go now. So they're in a bit of a hole again. They looked really positive after the Bucks win, and now they're in a hole that they're going to have to try and dig themselves out again. And when Steph comes back is obviously going to be a huge factor in that. But other than that, guys, I'll finish it up there. Again, shorter episode, but thank you very much for listening or watching. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that would be greatly appreciated. You can follow me at POC252, that's POK252, on X or Twitter. If you've got any comments that you'd like me to read out on next episode, then please leave them. Either you can tweet me or just leave them on the YouTube video and I can read them out. Always willing to share your thoughts and respond to them. So that would be fantastic. Otherwise, you can follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify as well. And for those of you in America, of which it's a Saturday night right now, enjoy your Sunday and the rest of your weekend. Thanks, guys.